everybody. Welcome to Textiles and Tea with the Handweavers Guild of America. I'm Kathy Group. I'm the advertising manager, and I get to be your host today. Today, we are so excited that we have another individual sponsor, Rebecca Hebert. Rebecca's been wonderful about sponsoring Textiles and Tea. And Rebecca, we thank you so much for doing that. As always, we will take questions for the session today. They'll be the last 15 minutes. Please put your questions in the Q&A and not in the chat. It's hard for me to see them when they're in the chat. Please put your comments. Love the comments. Those are great. We appreciate those. Today, we are excited to have another friend of HGA, and that is Nick DeFord. Nick is an artist, an educator, and art administrator who resides in Knoxville, Tennessee. He's exhibited at the Bascom Center for Visual Arts, the Houston Center for Contemporary Craft, the Knoxville Museum of Art. His artwork and his writing has been published in Surface Design Journal, Elephant Magazine, Hayden Ferry Review, and the Willow Springs. Currently, Nick is the Chief Program Officer at Arrowmont. So if you're familiar with Arrowmont, you know Nick, as well as the board member for the National Basketry Organization. He regularly teaches at fiber workshops and past workshops at the University of Louisville, East Carolina University, Arrowmont, Penland, and in the fall of 2018, he was a resident at the Rauschenberg Residency in Captiva, Florida. Additionally, he has been a reviewer for the Ohio Council and a juror for the American Tapestry Biennial 13. Hey, welcome. How are you, Nick? It's great to have you here.
I just realized I was muted. I'm unmuted now. I'm good.
Oh, okay. I just thought you were ignoring me. Hurt my feelings. We are so excited to have you here, but we got to start with the important stuff first. What is your favorite tea?
All right. So as a native Tennessean, I should probably say that it's just sweet iced tea.
Of course.
But I'm actually a hot tea drinker as well. Right now, I am drinking some oolong tea. But typically, I tend to like my teas pretty basic, just like a breakfast tea, a morning, a black breakfast tea, something like that. Usually my favorite.
All right. We'll have to add that one to the list. We had a couple of people like that tea. That's a good tea. So would you share with us how you got started in fibers?
Yeah, that's just an excellent question because for me, I mean, my journey is kind of a little bit windy. I was a drawing major in undergrad at the University of Tennessee. And I think like a lot of art students, I still remember the first, like during orientation of college and that you had to choose your major, and I was not prepared for that. And I was not prepared to choose a sort of a discipline of study. And I kind of like drawing, and so I selected drawing. But really at college, that's when I was sort of exposed to a lot of different types of art making. I was exposed to a lot of different ways of making that I hadn't really experimented with yet. Mm-hmm. And so even though I love drawing is always sort of my base of operations. I always say that I got sculpture envy when I was in college. I had so much fun seeing my sculpture friends who were making artwork out of anything they could find, the things at the side of the road they just pick up. And here I was in drawing classes using all these traditional materials, charcoal, pencil, and I just kind of got bored with how traditional those were. And growing up, my family owned a fabric remnant store. They would sell sort of bolt ends.
Really?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we owned boxes and boxes and boxes of fabric.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I'm going to make drawings with this fabric. And I started stitching. I was basically doing applique. I was sort of cutting out shapes and stitching them on, thinking I was very clever. And, I sort of taught myself stitching and all those kinds of things. And I think as I got into it more, I realized that here I was thinking I was making up stitches and doing all this stuff. And I quickly learned I really needed to know more about the history of textiles and embroidery. I needed to know more about the materials that I was using and the context that they have. So that's when I decided to go to grad school for fibers. I went to Arizona State University in Tempe, Arizona. I studied with Claire Verstegen and Mark Newport. Several people in the audience probably know them and their work. So yeah, and that's sort of, and ever since then, I can't go back. The materiality of fibers, the repetition of the movement is so exciting for me. I mean, that's sort of where I feel like my sensibility as a maker always comes in. Even if I'm going back to regular drawing, I feel like if I'm using pencils or I'm using traditional drawing tools, I'm still using them in a way that's very much about building up a surface, repetition, and those types of things that you see in fiber.
We're going to see a lot of that as we talk about your work today. I think that's a good start off point of how you work that together.
Sure.
So the first question I have for you is that as we look at your work and as we looked at those first three pieces, you have a variety of mediums that you use. So how do you describe or classify your work? If someone says, what's your modality? What do you tell people?
Yeah, you know, it's always so interesting, especially as you mentioned, I work at Arrowmont, and so I'm around a lot of makers all the time, and I hear a lot of people talk about their work. And, you know, these days, so many different artists are working cross-disciplinarily, interdisciplinarily. So what does it mean to label what you do as any particular field, to say that I'm a fiber artist, or to say that, because even the way that the images that we saw already, I'm stitching in the paper, I'm still doing that kind of applique collage style. So is what I'm doing collage? Is it fibers? Is it textiles? And I always, what I like to say is, if I'm going to watch my time so I don't go on too long, but whenever I have this conversation about sort of labels when it comes to artwork and artists, I think about, I'm also dating myself a little bit. I think about going to like a movie rental store, or even on Netflix. We'll just use Netflix for a more updated reference, where there's all these genres of movies, right? You say, I'm in the mood to watch a horror movie, or I'm in the mood to watch a sci-fi movie. But how do those movies get classified in those things? How do you determine what a movie is? I always bring up Casablanca as a really good example. Casablanca is probably the most famous love movie of all time, but it's also technically a war movie. It also doesn't get classified in the war movie section because it doesn't have a lot of the things that you think of as war movies having. It's also very much almost like a film noir. I mean, the way that the scenes are shot. But you could call it all of those things, and what you're doing it by calling it a war movie is you want to compare it to everything else that is also called a war movie. Or if you want to call it a love movie or a love story, you can then compare it to other things. So, you know, I think it's important for me to sort of label my work as fibers, even if I'm using paper and a sequence, because I want my pieces to be viewed in that lens of fiber, as you said, sort of modalities. So like all the things that fiber processes have: repetition, accumulation, building a surface one mark at a time. Even though you could also call what I do drawing, which sometimes I sort of do, or collage, it's really that repetition, that accumulation of lots of little parts to build a surface that I think you can kind of see through a lot of my work over time.
Oh, that's a great explanation. Well, let me ask you as a follow-up. Do you get annoyed when people ask you that?
No, I love it. I mean, I think it's a good conversation to have. It's because we as makers, we get to determine how we want to talk about our artwork. I mean, for the most part, like, again, anybody can come. If anybody's in the audience and looking to write about my work, anybody can write about my work under whatever lens that they want to. They can. I've been in shows that are, I've been in exhibitions that were collage exhibitions. I've been in exhibitions that were fibers. I like that my work can sort of cross into that, and I like to have those conversations. I mean, ultimately, I never get annoyed when people ask me questions. Even the most popular fiber question of how long did that take you to make? Because to me, I make artwork to have conversations. You know, making a piece, I don't want it to sort of sit in the world and not do anything. I want somebody to come up to it and be so interested in what they see, or the topic or the concept or the subject, that they want to talk about it to me or somebody else.
That's good to know. That's good to know. You have images of people often in your work, but they're not really seen as and like a portrait. There's almost like there's a story to it. It's more of a, like this one feels like a snapshot of a time of day and place. So can you talk some more about this?
Yeah, getting, adding figures to my artwork is sort of a recent trend, or a
Oh,
recent
is it?
trend. Yeah,
Okay.
well, I say recent, I mean, time is funny. And it's a really interesting story where I was doing mostly sort of just surface-based stuff. I was doing a lot of text-based pieces, which you'll see more a little bit later.
Mhm.
But I wasn't really using figures, and I was invited to fill in for a Penland class. There was an instructor who was teaching embroidery on, they were a photographer, and they were supposed to be teaching, like, go out, take your own photographs, and then embroider onto them, or stitch
Wow.
onto them, or embellish them in some way. But they couldn't teach the class, so Penland reached out to me to see if I would teach. And I was like, oh yeah, absolutely, this sounds fun, but I need, all the students to know that I'm not a photographer. I'm not going to pretend to be a photographer in terms of teaching people how to take really, really good photographs. But we'll have digital printers. If people can bring their iPhones, they can take photographs. People can bring found photographs. And so I was prepared to really teach this very specific class about stitching on the photographs, which I hadn't done a lot of prior to that. And so most of the found photographs, as you can see, actually from all my pieces, my surfaces are always typically found surfaces. I go to thrift stores, I go to antique stores, I just go to regular stores, and I like to buy and utilize my grounds as already having information. I see myself as an artist that pushes and manipulates information as much as creating new information. So here I was stitching on these photographs. Of course, most photographs, besides landscapes, have people in them. And I hadn't really experimented with that before. And the moment I started sort of stitching with figures, it changed the way people sort of responded to my work. Really people started to see, as you talked about, wanted to see narratives, stories, but even just that connection that you have with seeing a figure being manipulated is so much more visceral than text or patterns or these other things where you can kind of remove yourself from them. So it was really, it was one of those things that I think and again, people in the audience, sometimes you have to allow for your audience or your viewers to determine maybe the next direction that you go. I didn't think I would be making more images with photographs or more pieces. I mean, with figures in them, but people were responding to them so positively. I kind of had to keep exploring that. And so I explored figures in the way that I was already sort of familiar with in my other subject matter. So much of my artwork deals with, the piece before was about, it was stitched onto this game board of the Bermuda Triangle. I'm very much interested in my subject matter relating to the supernatural or the unknown or the occult. And so for me, a lot of the figure pieces are sort of based on old spirit photography, this idea of early photography, sort of the illusion of ghosts, the sort of, and you could call them a hoax, but when early photographers would manipulate the process in the dark room so that they could create phantoms or auras or ectoplasm. I'm very much interested in that. Like, even though now in a world that's everything is digital, to hand manipulate a photograph to add information to it, I mean, that's so original in the history of photography.
That's great. I have never heard anything like that before. That's wonderful. I love that. Well, this next piece, well, your work at Arrowmont, that you work at Arrowmont. I'll get this question out in a minute. Sorry. You work at Arrowmont, and so you're surrounded by artists and artwork and the whole creative process. So I can see in one way that would really be kind of invigorating and stimulating. But on the other hand, I could also see that it could be a little overwhelming at time with just all of this going on. So what is it like to be around that much creativity? I mean, you've mentioned it before about all the stuff that's going on there.
Yeah, it makes you really jealous, I'll tell you that. Because so much of my job at Arrowmont is I'm an arts administrator. I'm doing all the things that administrators do. I'm writing a lot of emails. I'm having a lot of meetings. I'm talking about the sort of logistics of the things that we do. So a lot of the times I'm not, I plan all the workshops that come through.
Mm-hmm.
I'm inviting all these wonderful instructors whose work I admire to come to Arrowmont. And the irony is sometimes when they're there, I have to be somewhere else. I have to be sort of in the future. Like right now, we're having workshops on campus, but I'm planning for 2024 or 2025. So I never feel like I'm present. But you know, it's one of those things where it does inspire you. I mean, you look around, all these people are there, they're making, and even though you're doing the emails and the writing, you look at that and you say, well, maybe I need to carve out some time in the studio tonight, you know? So it can be a real motivator, you know, watching other people make, watching people take risks and explore new things. It makes you want to explore new things as well.
I know when I get off the Zoom and I've been talking with people, it's like, I got to go do something. I need to try that, or, you know, I need to get back on the loom. So I understand that completely. Well, when you're surrounded by all this artwork and different modalities and everything, do you find that you want to try something different, that, oh, you know, I've never done caustic before, I'm going to try that, or, you know, whatever, I've never been blacksmithing, let me try that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And we offer, even though sometimes I can't always take like the 1 week classes, we offer a lot of community classes at Arrowmont, sort of 1 day things, and staff members are all the time taking classes. I took a needle felting class, which I never done this past winter. I sort of look around and I see, you know, again, since my background is originally in drawing, I'm always still really sort of inspired by different drawing, but wanting to keep it a little bit more experimental and different things. So for a while, a couple of years ago, I got really into wood burning, and I was adding wood burning to stuff because it was such a novel way to make marks. Again, it felt really, you know, unusual and fun for me. You know, at the same time, I think sometimes trying out different things also lets you know what kind of maker you are, and then what kind of maker you aren't. Because I did take, and I recommend this to people to come when they come to Arrowmont. You know, so often, you know, when people look at our website to determine what class they want to take, they might only look at what they consider their artistry to be. So if you're a ceramics artist, you only look at the ceramics classes, or if you're a fibers artist, you only look at fibers. But I really encourage people to like break out of the mold and take something they would never normally take. And before the pandemic, I took a musical instrument making class at Peters Valley, and I took that with Beth Ireland and Peter Park, two wonderful people. And even though it was a blast and I had a lot of fun, I was like, you know, I don't have the patience to be a woodworker. Like, I would be sanding my instrument and I'd be like, all right, I'm done sanding. And Beth was like, you still have so much more sanding to go. Look at all these different grits we have. And I'm like, but it feels so smooth. She's like, no, that's not smooth. And so like, I realized that even though as a fibers artist, I'm really used to like methodical, slow stitching, there's some things I'm not good at. You know, I've always said like the sanding of a thing, some people can really love that and get into that surface. Nope, I was too antsy for that. And the same for like, I always bring up printmaking too, because I don't have the patience for printmaking either. And again, people say, well, why not? Because you do fibers, and fibers is slow and methodical. I was like, yeah, but every little stitch that you do, every time you throw a shuttle, you see this progress being made on your final piece. You're like building it brick by brick, basically. And you can see that progress, even though it's slow and it takes a lot of time. Well, something like printmaking is like, you have to prep your lithostone, you have to prep this, you have to carve this, then you soak that in acid, then you actually finally pull the print, and then you have to do a second color, and then you're going to do additions, so you got to do a bunch of them. And that kind of making, I determined, wasn't for me. And so I think it's really good to experiment, to find new avenues to communicate, but also for people to find what kind of maker they're not, you know, what kind of person that like, hey, I don't have to push myself in a medium or a technique that I don't find interesting or fun, because there's so many different ways of making. Even within fibers, there's so many different ways of making, all the different techniques between dyeing, printing, quilting, stitching, basketry, felt making, paper making. There's really kind of something for everybody. So,
well, I will have to share a story that I was in a week-long weaving class, and a woman took the class who'd never taken weaving before, but she was a quilter, and she was about to pull her hair out. She was so miserable putting the warp on, and she just was frustrated and said, I can't stand this. And I kept thinking, I couldn't sew. I could not piece those little pieces together. So it's really funny how being patient and detailed for one person is completely different than patient and detailed for another. I didn't understand why she was having such a hard time and when she could do quilting,
Yeah.
So I get that. I understand that completely. Well, in this next work, you used embroidery. You've talked about, that you've taught embroidery. You used embroidery, and you embroidered on top of an image, like you said that you had started doing.
Mhm.
Would you talk about the background on this and why? Because there's a whole series, we're just showing one, but how do you choose the background? You've talked some about that already, but like with this kind of a background, I think it's bunnies. Yeah, little
Yeah, it's
bunnies.
bunnies. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you
Well,
choose it?
that's a great question. Again, I love going to thrift stores. I love going to antique stores. That is where I go to get art supplies. So a lot of the times when I'm searching for sort of any kind of paper ephemera that I might stitch upon or use later, sometimes I don't know what I'm going to do with it. I just think it's interesting. This was from it was sort of a little portfolio of prints. Clearly they were meant to be sort of framed. They were all nature prints. And they set, so much of what I get when I go to these thrift stores, it just sits in a bin for years and maybe even longer. I mean, I was doing a lot of map-based work, in the mid sort of 2000s and up until maybe like 2010, 11. I still use maps, but sometimes I find maps or other ephemera that is too wonderful to even mess with. I don't even want to do anything with it because I'm so enamored with the surface. So a lot of times it just sits around until one day I sort of find an idea or inspiration. With this one in particular, it was really funny because I had those prints. I kind of separate them into piles. There was there were some that were sort of like predators. And so one you've already seen, if you think back, everybody, to the intro images, there was one image of a badger that was kind of pulling out
Oh
a
yeah, right.
marmot. Oh yeah, there it is. Yeah. This badger pulling out a marmot of this hole. And I started with that series. I had these sort of, all the predator pieces were killing something. So the first one was like a bear that I did, and had a fish in its mouth. And I wondered what would happen if I covered up this predator so it became even more sort of monstrous. It was just this unknown thing. Again, I mentioned genre movies. I do like horror movies. And typically what makes a horror movie with slashers is they have these masks on. They're this sort of unknown entity that becomes more than the person that they are. So I was really interested in that. So I did this whole little series where I covered up and I sort of, somebody's asking a question. Is it possible to see close-ups of the images? I don't know if we can see close-ups here. I don't have close-ups, but it's, people can just like lean in a
Well,
little bit.
one question I have before you keep going is, what is the blue? Are they beads?
Oh yeah, great question. So those are sequins.
Okay, a sequence. Okay.
So sequins with beads. So yeah, they're sequins. So good question. So the sequins. So I wanted to sort of obscure these animals. And so if we go back to the rabbit picture now, I had done this sort of series of predators, and I'm like, well, what am I going to do with the not predators, all the prey? And the moment I kind of said, like, what am I going to do with the prey? It just came to me, that I should put a prayer on the prey. So I found these sort of very old traditional prayers, and I tried to find these little moments that were that had some sort of connection with the image underneath. So in this case, this prayer of, even as I clothe my body with wool, cover my soul with the shadow of your wing. That's such sort of like supposedly a calming thing to say, but in the case of these rabbits who have to worry about the shadows of wings swooping down from the sky to pluck them and take them off, it's very different. So I kind of liked, in this case, this little series of prey pieces that I did, this the sort of calming, soothing prayer in combination with these creatures that I have a lot of empathy for, who have to live their life avoiding predators. They have to live their life avoiding death. And so it seemed to fit really well to me. But again, when I bought these pieces, I did not have that idea. I just had to wait and hold on to them until it sort of struck me.
Well, what I thought was so interesting in the predator one is that, and again, this is my background or what I come from. Well, I guess almost everybody has experience. I mean, to me, like beads and sequins are like fun and playful, and you put it with this mean badger. I just think that's interesting. What a juxtaposition.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see some other sequin work too. I mean, I love sequins and beads. Again, I started with embroidery, and when I wanted to embellish more, I really have an affinity for sequins because I think sequins as a medium says so much. I mean, they're supposed to be this thing that sparkles and shines. They're supposed to emulate jewelry and other things that are so much more about showing off wealth or showing off these things, but sequins aren't. They're cheap, they're plastic. So it's so much about this flash and flare. There's a sort of amount of sort of honesty about sequins that I like. So yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. This next image is an image of a sailor, and there must be significance to the use of beads. I want you to talk about the use of beads there because he just covers his whole face. So before you share the meaning about what the beads mean and why you covered his face and everything, what kind of reaction would you like to get from people when they see this? And is that important to you? Because this is really a powerful image.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, it kind of goes back to what I was mentioning about getting into photography and also what I was just mentioning about obscuring the predators and how that makes things different. I think that, like I mentioned, I see myself as an artist who rearranges information or sometimes cover up information, and how that changes everything. Like I think about a letter that's been redacted, like a letter that was sent from a soldier or a sailor, for example, that's been redacted. So you only have these little bits of information that come through, but you see all this other blacked out information. And when you see that hidden stuff, that letter could be as boring as possible, but when you see it obscured like that, it suddenly becomes mysterious. There's some secrets in there. And again, the same thing I was saying about horror movies, the masked stalker is so much more threatening than somebody who's unmasked. So I found out pretty quickly that by covering or even half covering or obscuring figures, it was just powerful. It really became this sort of, people had this immediate reaction of fear. I mean, like how much the image of a person is a simulacrum for like a real person. I've had some people who they're like, are these your photographs? I'm like, no, I find them in thrift stores. They're like, how could you stitch onto somebody that you don't know? And I'm like, well, it's not, I don't think anything nefarious is happening. I mean, it's just an image, but that relationship between a photograph actually being the person is something that is still, even in a digital age, is still really powerful. So a lot of that was just exploring what happens when you cover somebody's face. Do they become more menacing? What happens when they lose their identity? In this case, again, it's hard to tell with the photo, but the physicality, the three-dimensionality of the beads, I think is really important in the actual piece. I sort of mixed together this sort of mixture of red and auburn and brown kind of beads. I don't know if this has any really particular meaning other than the fact that I talked about, I think I was drawing a lot of early inspiration from spirit photography and early kind of occult photography, where especially with spiritualism in the early 19th or late 19th century, early 20th century, photographers were really trying to capture otherworldly things, especially like during a seance, they would try to capture ectoplasm. And it was all this sort of either hoax that was happening at the time, or like I said, photographic manipulation in the darkroom, where people would obscure faces with like veils or gauze or any sort of like thing like that would make the moment so much more mysterious and almost threatening. So I think that's definitely the part here. I think the color does a lot. I don't know if it was intentional when I did it, but this sort of like in this, I don't mean for this to seem as violent as it does, but with the red beads, it really does become like musculature or some sort of like meat like subject, which is really unnerving to see, like this face with this sort of like just red mass there. And that's such a strong contrast to the matte photography, the black and white, everything's smooth. If you look at his hands are even like a little blurry and out of focus. And that's such a contrast to like the information and the color that the beads bring to it.
Yeah, it's really powerful. I have a friend that does the same thing. She gets old paintings and she puts Batman mask on these paintings.
Sure.
And it's just hilarious how that little piece of black just changes the painting. So I get that whole thing. It really is amazing just to change it that much. Now this next image, I was amazed how I reacted when I saw this, because it is such a well-known image. This is from I think it's Trivial Pursuit, right?
This was the Monopoly one.
Oh, Monopoly. We saw Trivial Pursuit. Because when I saw that, I was like, oh, I know that game. And I thought how funny to react to something that's so familiar, that you know so well. So why this topic? Why this image? And then was that what you were going for? That, oh, I know this.
Great question. And it kind of answers, there's a question in the Q&A from Susan about how I attach the sequins to my surface. And this actually answered that as well. I was stitching, as I mentioned, I was stitching a lot into maps and photographs and other sort of paper ephemera. And there's tricks of the trade of that, which I can talk about. If you're stitching in the paper, if people here do embroidery, you have to be a little bit more careful when you're stitching in the paper, because paper can rip and sort of cause a sort of a critical failure of your surface. So there's tips, tricks. If it's thick paper, you don't have to worry about it, but you can put iron-on interfacing on the back to help strengthen it. But as always, I was wanting to see how far I could push. Like, what's the next challenge? I want to be challenged a little bit. And so I was wondering, how thick of paper could I possibly stitch into? Like, how could I stitch into something that was rigid? And I've always been interested in games, board games and other sorts of just games in general. So it didn't take me long for me to realize that if you think about it, I was already interested in maps. I was doing a lot of research about maps. Board games are basically just maps. They're sort of conceptual maps, but you have a start, you have a finish, you have a path, you have something that you do. And so it was an easy jump aesthetically for me to go from maps to board games. And then it was just like with the Bermuda Triangle game, I think the Bermuda Triangle game was one of the first board games I stitched into. And to answer Susan's question, I attached the sequins by stitching. So I hold the sequins down with seed beads, but everything is hand stitched. I don't do any machine stitching. With the game boards, because of the rigidity of the surface, you have to pre-poke the holes. So it slows everything. If stitching wasn't already slow enough, it slows everything down more, because I have to take an awl and poke the hole, and then I have a hole, and then I stitch through it, and then I poke the next hole. So it slows everything down, but because of that, I think you get sort of a richer viewing experience. So because I was interested in the aesthetics of board games, because I was interested in sort of patterns and mapping, a lot of it, like even with this piece, I wanted to see how much information I could obscure so that only maybe the pattern was left, but people would still recognize what it was. So this one has the image of the dice in the middle, it's sort of a little bit more literal, but I have like obscured basically entire game boards. Like I did that with a Scrabble board where I completely covered the whole Scrabble board with sequins, but the sequins colors sort of matched the colors of the squares that indicate, double word score, double letter score. So if you stared at it, you're like, what am I looking at? And then you can see this pattern, this X pattern of pinks and blues, and people would eventually get there. They'd be like, oh yeah, that's a Scrabble board. In the same way that, so many people have played Monopoly, the colors around the edge of the board indicate, the properties underneath. And so there's a little bit of almost like cultural memory, I think, that like people can see this and be like, I remember what those properties are. I remember what this is. But I like to give enough clues, right? I mean, there's enough clues here that even you can still see where the chance cards go and the treasure chest cards go, and that little tiny peak of the Monopoly logo sticking out from the dice. I love moments like that, where you just give, it's again, to go back to the idea of the mask or things that are covered, it's seeing the eyes in the mask. It's seeing that little bit of person like come through that I think is really fun for me.
Well, I just want you to know I'm thinking it, but I won't ask it of, oh my gosh, how long did it take you?
Yeah,
It's pretty labor intensive.
well, and for me, you know, it was so nice because I really did start the board games not long after, or maybe around the same time as I was doing the photographs. And I kind of see, you know, I'm a firm believer that artists can have lots of different bodies of work going at once, that people don't need to funnel down everything that they do into one type of thing. And so even though it might seem very different to do these board games and to do the sort of stitch photography that might have to do with, you know, the occult or whatever, what I like about it is it gives me as a maker two, I always think about them as like highway lanes. One is moving very slow and one is moving very quickly. So like a stitch photograph, I might be able to complete in a day or a week. But something like the game boards take months. And so I can work on a game board and be sitting there stitching and poking holes until I get bored with it. And I'm like, I gotta make something today. Like I can't, this is good. This is the slow lane, but I'm going to jump over to the fast lane and crank out a bunch of small things really quickly to get that satisfaction of seeing something to complete. Because we as artists, no matter what method of making that you choose, we want to see the final object, and we get satisfaction from seeing the final object.
Yeah.
Like cutting it off the loom and looking at it. That's why you spend so much time sitting at the loom, throwing the shuttle back and forth, so that at the end you can see the final product. And so sometimes you have to give yourself little short projects. If you're doing these projects that take a long time, definitely recommend doing something that takes less time to get that sort of more immediate satisfaction, I think.
Well, I know that you've talked about that you do mostly administration work now, but you're also a teacher. And I'm always amazed when I hear teachers talk about why they teach and what they get from it. So would you talk some about that? What's teaching for you? What does that mean for you?
Yeah, you know, I mean, for me, especially how my story came about finding fibers, I like to teach because I'm passionate about, you know, either the content or the subject or the technique or the media that I use. And so I definitely love to see other people use that with their own voice, you know, like that if I teach an embroidery class, I like to really work one-on-one with students, because not everybody is using embroidery for the same reason. It could be somebody like me who is a drawer who wanted to add embroidery to their paintings or their drawings. It could be somebody who wants to learn traditional embroidery, or it could be somebody who wants, you know, I don't even know what they want to do. So working with people one-on-one and finding out why they're using this material, this technique or concept that I'm really in love with, and then seeing them fall in love with that same thing is really meaningful. I think for me also, you know, it sounds selfish for me to say that, but I'm sure all the teachers in the audience would agree. When you teach, you learn as much as the students, because they're trying new things that you've never tried before, or they're experimenting in ways that you've never thought about experimenting. And like I said earlier, for me, artwork is all about conversation. Whether or not you're a functional potter making mugs, having a conversation about mugs, or watching people look at things and use things and utilize scarves and clothing and all this kind of stuff. It's about bringing people together to talk about arts and concepts. And so that's the other big part of teaching for me. It's just people coming around and talking. I've taught, and this is not to obviously not what we're doing here, but I've taught a couple of like online workshops, and it's not the same. I mean, this is a lecture, so I'm talking, and if this was a lecture hall, I would be talking and people would be on the audience. Actually, I like lectures online a lot better, because like as demonstrated before, I can answer questions as they come up, and things like that. But it was very difficult to really get into an online workshop as an instructor, because what I missed was having students talk to one another. That's what I missed. Like here I was saying, like, I can tell somebody how to stitch, you know, and show it with the little detail camera and all that kind of stuff. But what I missed was seeing the students lean over and say, well, what are you working on? And they're like, oh, that's cool. Can you show me how you did that?
Yeah.
And that's part of the teaching process too, that it's not just one instructor who's up here and all the students here, is that everybody should be sort of on the same level, learning from one another, experiencing, trying out new things, and being in the sort of vulnerable situation. So
Yeah, I always say that at workshops, there's that aha moment where you learn something that you say, okay, I just got my money's worth from this workshop. And I don't know how many times, and no offense to the teacher, sometimes that aha moment came from the person sitting next to me. It's like, oh, you know what? If you set your loom up this way, you'll have less trouble, blah, 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 right? So I miss that talking to people in the room thing.
Yeah.
I think we all do, but you know. The other thing about teaching I thought was interesting, and it's kind of like you do both. It seems like one way of looking at teaching is that some teachers present the material, and that's the most important. They're like, I want you to learn this material. I want you to learn this technique or whatever. And then some teachers are like, I want you to have an experience, either learning the material or whatever. And they're both excellent. They're both important. And as you talk, it sounds like you have a real nice balance of both.
Yeah. And especially when I teach embroidery, I like to kind of teach it kind of like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Like I do all these basic stitches. And, you know, the very first stitch I show is like, you know, a running stitch. I'm like, here's a running stitch. I was like, you all can quit now. Like, you can stop. And if this all you needed to do is to make a dotted line, you've learned it. You can go off and you can draw and you can embroider all day. But do you want to go further? And people are like, yeah, sure. And then we learn a back stitch and then a split stitch. So now you can make a solid line. You can quit now. Like you've got all the embroidery that you need to know how to do. You can go and you can draw on cloth all day long. But do you want to go further? And they're like, yeah, you know, and so that's the thing, is that it's really about finding out what the student needs, not what I need the student to do, but what the student needs to find out for themselves so that they can accomplish the vision that they have in their head. And whether, you know, if they find out, you know, that, hey, I love the split stitch, all I want to do is make a line, then you don't need to know French knots and bullion knots and blanket stitches and all that kind of stuff. So
it took me a minute. I finally got do you want to be a millionaire? But in your truths, exactly right. That was a great analogy. I love that. Well, you talked about your education and that you got a degree first at Tennessee and then in Arizona, and you can't get much further apart than those two states. And the culture is different, and the geography is different. So how do you think being in two different separate parts of the world like that impacted on you when you were going to school? Did it change how you looked at things? Was it an eye-opener?
Oh yeah, most definitely. I mean, the landscape always has an impact. I think, you know, the natural world around us has an impact on us. It could be subtle over time. I think that you know, even though I utilize a lot of embellishment in my work, I see myself as a little bit of a minimalist. You know, if you break down my work, there's not a lot of components. It's like, let's just take the rabbit piece. There's a background with rabbits on it. It was already created. I added some text to it. I kept my color choices very, you know, sort of like monochrome. It's all green. So when it comes to decision making, I'm a little bit of a minimalist. I always say my color schemes are either like monocolored, black and white, or all colors. Like I don't like to sort of think too much about color theory. I just sort of make these sort of intuitive choices. I think a little bit of that minimalism probably came out of my studies at Arizona State. And it could have been my colleagues that I was around, could have been work that I was being open to, or could have been the landscape. For me, a lot of people struggled when they had to move to Phoenix and in the desert. People came, all my colleagues and all my friends came from around the country, and people coming from lush places, they're like, oh, the desert, you know, I don't like it. And for me, I loved the desert. I absolutely would put up with those temperatures just to live in it, because I liked it because it was a minimal landscape. I mean, I come from East Tennessee, where, you know, I swear the past week our my weeds in my trees have grown, like I could watch them grow inch by inch with how much rain we get. In kudzu, literally you can almost watch move across the ground. That it was nice to go to a place that everything was just, again, kind of monochrome but again, the desert flora and fauna is actually really, really rich. You just have to kind of like look into it. You have to find it. It's not overbearing like the foliage here in Tennessee. So yeah, I mean, I always encourage people, traveling can definitely alter your perspectives on yourself as much as your perspective on the world.
Yeah, I had a friend who moved to Asheville from Boulder, Colorado. And she said, I couldn't stay there because it made me claustrophobic.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? And she explained that all the trees and I never thought about that. I mean, I had been to Boulder and I thought I've grown up with that around me that I don't even think about it. And it was a real eye opener for her to say that of, wow, that is different. It's very different what you're used to. Yeah. Yeah. So what's next for Nick?
Well, again, I've always trying to find new ways to explore. I've been getting into a little bit with the text-based pieces. I've always been interested in writing. I've been writing a little bit more than I have in the past. I took a writing class, an online web writing class last year, and that's really sort of inspired me to get back into more text-based pieces, or think about even incorporating writing and visual art together. But as which you mentioned during my introduction, I'm also on the board of the National Basketry Organization. I've taught basketry classes before, but I wouldn't consider myself necessarily a basket maker, but a basket appreciator and a basket collector, and definitely a basketry education appreciator. But it's the same thing about working at Arrowmont, working with my colleagues at MBO and seeing all the great basket makers out there. I'm jealous. Because again, all this started with sculpture envy, and I'm like, should I get more into 3D objects? Like, all of my work has been so two-dimensional my whole life. And I was like, maybe I should start making baskets. So I've been in the back of my mind thinking about some maybe sculptural basketry stuff that I might be doing in the future. Again, very much the same way. I'm already thinking about, do I need to, but with the modality that I already work with, do I need to weave my own basket, or can I take a found basket and embellish it?
Oh, right.
Like, can I take something and stitch into a basket? Can I take something that already exists? Because that's the thing. As much as I go into thrift stores, there's never a shortage of baskets in thrift stores. I mean, baskets are everywhere, and I'm like, this could be really interesting. Like, to take that same mentality of taking found papers and embellishing them. Maybe I could become a basketry artist that way.
I may steal your idea, Nick.
Sure. No, everybody can, I feel like if I do my due diligence and my research, I'm sure it's not even my idea.
Well, my guild is doing a thing about using up, what we have, that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And I'm the same way. It's like, oh my gosh, if somebody else gives me a basket, I'm going to scream. It's like, yeah, but what if I made it my basket, how I want it? Because I don't want to learn basketry. I think it would be like quilting. I would be terrible at it. But that's a great idea. But I will give you credit.
Okay, that sounds
Nick
good.
DeFord's idea. I'm just copying it. All right. So do you have time to teach? Like, if a guild contacted you and said, come teach, do you have time for that?
Yeah, I haven't. I had a class scheduled this summer that I had to reschedule at Sugar Maples Art Center, but it looks like it's going to be rescheduled for next year. So
is that New York?
Yes. Yeah.
That's a wonderful place. I've not been there, but I've seen it on. Oh, it looks wonderful.
So hopefully that'll happen next summer. But I still love teaching and talking and having conversations. So yeah. Of course, people can welcome. I'm easy to find on the internet. Just type my name in. My website went down for a bit, so I've kind of got an in-process website I'm working on. But my email is very easy to remember. It's my first initial last name, ndeford@gmail.com. So anybody can reach out.
All right. And you're always at Arrowmont.
That's true.
All right. We got some questions. You want to go over these questions? All right. So we've already talked about how you attach sequins. Do you ever glue them?
No, again, talking about different types of makers, and this is going to be the trouble. This is what I've been thinking about with the sort of embellished basketry idea is, as a maker, part of the reason why I left drawing behind is I have a very specific idiosyncrasy that I don't like my hands to be messy. Like I took a 1 day like wheel throwing class in clay, and it was hilarious because I would like sit down at the wheel, I get clay on my hands and immediately go up and wash my hands and come back. And, the instructor was like, Nick, you don't have to keep washing your hands like that. I was like, I can't stand having clay on my hands. So
yeah, not your modality, not your modality.
I cannot stand having sticky hands. So the challenge is going to be, can I add beads, sequins, other found embellishments to a basket without using adhesives, without using glue? I know that I can. There's ways to do it. Wire, all these sort of things, zip ties, whatever. It doesn't matter. But that's part of the challenge. Is I think because I like games so much, part of the fun of what I do is to ask myself, can I do this? Like, can I stitch into a game board? Is this possible? So,
yeah, I can't imagine how you got a needle through that.
We'll figure it out.
That's stiff. All right. How do you store and how do you retrieve or catalog your found objects or vintage things? That's from SF. I don't know who that is, but great question, SF.
I would really like to have a sophisticated answer other than they're just all shoved into a bin. I mean, if it's something really interesting, like if I find something that the piece of paper or whatever it is inspirational in and of itself, I'll pin it to my wall. I'll pin it to my studio wall. I'll have it there in front of me so I can see it all the time. But other than that, I just kind of throw everything in a bin, which is kind of nice because then you forget about it. And then if at some point you need inspiration, you dump out your bin and you look at everything and you'll see things with new eyes. So I think both is good. If you put something up in your studio so you're looking at it every day, you'll probably ruminate it on it more. But hiding things and then rediscovering them later is just as rich of an experience and can be just as inspirational as well. So
true. This is from Karen LeBlanc. Hi, Karen. She said this may be a weird question, but have you ever or thought about incorporating LED lights with a battery or whatever to use on your pieces? Imagine how cool lights would be on your work.
It would be definitely cool. I mean, it's not something like most things, I always feel intimidated, I was like, oh, I could never learn electronics. Ironically, though, my wife is also a fiber artist, and for her thesis show, worked with electronic textiles, did like Arduino boards and sort of textiles that lit up and textiles that moved. So I definitely have a teacher who could teach me some of that.
There you go.
But I haven't done it yet. So.
And you have Jerry Faulkner in your part of it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
She's absolutely the queen of LED lights.
I know.
This is another question from SF. SF, we want to know who you are, but it's a great question. What are your inspiration, or what artist or people are you inspired by?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's always so hard for me to sort of think about names on the spot. There's a couple different people. A lot of the times I'm inspired by things, not necessarily even things that are technically like what I do, but thematically about what I like, or conceptually about what I might be interested in. Because I always say this, especially to artists, like when you're thinking about what to make work about, like, okay, that you love embroidery, but what are you going to embroider? Like what topics, what subject matter, what do you want to have those conversations about? You always want to have those kind of conversations. You want to do the best type of research that you can possibly do is research that doesn't feel like research. So if it's something that you were going to do anyway, that's the kind of research you should be doing, or artwork that you should be making artwork about, which is why I make artwork about strange and unusual things, because I like to research strange and unusual things. These are things, I was a kid in the 90s who grew up on X-Files. Like that's in sort of like my genes to want to research more about that. So I'm always love artists who are like dipping into notions of the supernatural or the occult. When it comes to other fiber artists, there's a fiber artist that I've been following recently on Instagram, who every time he posts something, I just sort of fall in love with it a little bit more. His name is Peter Fredrickson, who does machine stitch embroidery based on like old cartoon stills, like Looney Tune cartoon stills, but like the background. So these really like brightly popping colors of just this really just nondescript scene. And there's something about that, again, that I think I find myself a little bit attracted to in terms of like that found image, but then stitched, and how that physicality makes it so much different. So yeah, but again, I do a lot of reading, just reading anything, reading books about, nonfiction books about the supernatural, fictional books that are about the supernatural, and all that kind of stuff sort of funnels into my brain and comes out as artwork at some point, I think.
So Fredrickson?
Yep.
First name?
F-R-E-D. I can write it over here in the chat for people.
Okay. Yeah, I want to check that out.
Yeah, definitely. It's very interesting work.
What also sounds like, I imagine going to a thrift store with you, and it sounds like maybe the thrift store is one of your inspirations too. I could just see you walking along going, oh, I know what I can do with this, kind of aha moment.
Yeah, definitely. Thrift stores, antique stores, they're just yard sales. They're just the best, because that's really when you surprise yourself. Again, it's a little bit different than how other artists work. I not that I know how every artist work, but I assume that painters who go into the art supply store, they're not going to get inspiration. They're going to get the paints that they need, right? The paints that they've run out of, the blank canvas. But when I walk into an antique store, I don't know what I'm going to walk out with. I'm going in with, I'm the blank canvas, and then the things sort of jump out at me and grab those and then take them with me. So
I like hardware stores. Pick up things and
Same.
go, what is this? What does this do? Or what could I make it do?
Yeah, I'm very much a fan of hardware stores as well. So.
There you go. Well, I can't believe we're done for the day. Thank you so much for being on here. This has been so much fun. What a great conversation.
Thank you.
You're so good at this.
Thank you, Kathy, and thanks to Mandy and Elizabeth as well. Thanks to everybody at HGA. I really appreciate it. So.
Oh, it was wonderful having you on here. And I have to say, I've known you for a while with all my dealings with Arrowmont, but I've never really talked to you. This has been very enlightening. So I can't wait to see what you do next.
Thank you.
Again, thank you so much, Nick. And go to his website. And actually in your Instagram, right? Your Instagram has a lot of stuff, right?
Instagram, and there's a couple of YouTube videos of me out there, like of
that's right.
Talks that I've done in the past and lectures I've done. So if people want to, I don't know why you want to hear my voice even more, but if you do, check out YouTube as well. You'll probably find some things on there too. So.
All right. Thank you so much. And then we want to thank our sponsor again. It's wonderful when an individual steps up and says, I want to sponsor Textiles and Tea. And that is Rebecca Hebert. Rebecca, we thank you so much. We do appreciate it. We hope you've enjoyed today too, Rebecca. We want to remind everybody that if you want to sponsor somebody for Textiles and Tea, or your guild or your business, feel free. You can go online and purchase a sponsorship on any date. Choose a date that you like and you can take that sponsorship. Or if you have any questions, give me a call and we will chat. So we appreciate that. We have studio tours coming up for Spinning and Weaving Week. I know y'all think, oh my gosh, that's in October, but it's coming around the corner. It's going to be here quicker than you think. So registration is now open for Spinning and Weaving Week. If you would like to go to one of these tours, and if you've never seen one, they really are inspirational, mainly because you never know what someone's space is going to be. We've had little tiny spaces that were just so creative and inspirational, and then beautiful old churches that were turned into studios. So check them out, and you can go ahead and start signing up if you would like to attend one of these. And there's all kinds of things coming up with Spinning and Weaving Week. We've got the Art Sparks of the classes that you might want to take. We've got our vendors will be on there. You can learn about new products that are coming out, just a variety with, and most importantly is the show your stuff. We're going to have a kind of like show and tell that you have at your guild, but you can show off online, and you can show whether it's a dish towel, a scarf, a coat, pair of mittens, whatever you want to show. We love seeing that. We want to see what people are working on, especially after a summer of going to conferences and workshops. We want to see what y'all are working on. So keep that in mind. You can start signing up now. We would love to see what you've got come October the 2nd through the 8th. It's a week long, just one event after another all day long. You'll love it. It's going to be so much fun. You can, oh, and just a reminder, it's $25 for the whole week. That's a steal for everything that you get. And Art Sparks is available for $10 to $20, depending on how long it is. Some of the Art Sparks are just a lecture. Some are a walking you through to make something. So go check that out. And like I said, registration is now open. We're at Textiles and Tea, along with Spinning and Weaving Week, Careers in Textiles. These are all supported by the donations to the Fiber Trust. If you would like to see more programming like that, please support HGA by becoming a member or donating, or both. And you can do that at weavespindie.org. If you've missed any of the episodes, you can watch them again on HGA's Facebook page, and we are getting those up on YouTube. I think almost all of them are up on YouTube now. If not, be sure you subscribe, then that way you'll get an email saying HGA just put up another episode. So check those out if you want to watch them again. Please join us next week. We have the child prodigy, Astrid Tauber. If you've not met this lovely woman, girl, I can't call her a girl, a woman. She's only, I think, 13, maybe 14 now. She does incredible work. We are so excited to have her here next week. So y'all have a great week, and thank you for joining us today. We'll see you next Tuesday. Happy tea.